Reid thinks it'll take a lot more than conservative political endorsements and super PAC donations for that to happen. I'm Mitchell Hartman for Marketplace.
Our executive producer is Kelly Silvera. Our digital producer is Virginia Smith. Our engineers are Brian Allison and John Brewington. And in New York, I'm Sabri Benishore with the Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.
Orange Park Mall can assist you with back-to-school shopping. Styles for the entire family, from toddlers to teens. Shopping options include Buckle, Laugh World Kids Boutique, American Eagle, Rack Room Shoes, and more. More info at orangeparkmall.com.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Ahead in the next 5 minutes, live local news for the First Coast from the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and on today's First Coast Connect, it's the biggest stories of the week. A scathing city investigation says a 2019 affordable housing effort was a near total failure. St. Johns County is arresting more people for DUI, but also dropping more of those cases than before. Florida Power and Light investors sue, saying dirty tricks caused the utility to lose value. And a Nassau County cop killer receives the ultimate punishment. We'll talk about all that and more with our panel of journalists on this week's Friday Week in Review. Then we'll tell you why it's time to get in the running now for a Thanksgiving tradition. You can join the conversation on air by calling 904-549-2937, or you can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also reach out on social media and watch our live stream right now on Facebook or YouTube. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Korva Coleman. A Russian court has convicted Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich of spying and sentenced him to 16 years in prison. Gershkovich and the U.S. say the charges are false, but the trial was sped up, raising speculation of a possible prisoner exchange. The Republican National Convention has concluded in Milwaukee. Donald Trump has accepted the GOP nomination for president. Earlier this week, Trump said he would use his acceptance speech to focus on unity. But NPR Stephen Fowler says Trump's tone changed last night.
His voice was a little bit more subdued, but Trump still made false claims about the 2020 election, called COVID the China virus, and continued a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric about, quote, cities flooded with illegal aliens. I mean, the short and the long of it is earlier this week, we heard Trump ripped up his speech and wrote a brand new one more focused on positivity and unity, but we got typical Trump with a teensy bit of a different tone.
NPR Stephen Fowler reporting. President Biden remains at his home in Delaware recovering from COVID. Now, Maryland Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin has asked the president to consider his legacy as he weighs whether to continue his campaign. NPR's Deirdre Walsh reports.
In a 4-page letter obtained by NPR, Raskin urged the president to consider his achievements and the public's political judgment about November's election. Raskin didn't directly urge Biden to drop out, but cited the 2003 baseball championship game that featured a pitcher with a tired arm who resisted calls to leave the game, and his team ultimately lost. Raskin wrote, quote, "There's no shame in taking a well-deserved bow to the overflowing appreciation of the crowd when your arm is tired out, and there is real danger for the team in ignoring the statistics. The Biden campaign insists the president is still the nominee." Deirdre Walsh, NPR News.
Israeli officials say an explosive drone has crashed into an apartment building near the U.S. Embassy branch in Tel Aviv. It killed one man. The Houthi militia in Yemen is claiming responsibility for the attack, saying it's in retaliation for Israel's offensive in Gaza. NPR's Daniel Estrin has more from Tel Aviv.
I am a block away from the American Embassy. You can see the American flag flying, and right here is where the explosion took place just after 3 a.m. local time. There are police teams picking up bits of shrapnel on the ground. Teams are clearing broken windows from apartments. There were no Israeli air raid sirens that went off to warn residents of this incoming device. And one resident who lives just a couple blocks away, Elior Cohen, says his dog woke up startled from this large blast. And he says more than 9 months into the Israeli-Hamas war, for Israel's enemies to hit central Tel Aviv is the holy grail. Daniel Estrin, NPR News, Tel Aviv.
On Wall Street in pre-market trading, Dow futures are lower. This is NPR.
And good morning. It's 4 minutes after 9. This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. UF President Ben Sasse announced his resignation last night, citing his wife's health issues and the need to spend more time with his children, the youngest of whom is 13 years old. Sasse has been at the helm of Gator Nation for less than 2 years. His last day on the job will be July 31st. His announcement comes less than a week after Florida A&M University President Larry Robinson said he will also be stepping down after nearly 7 years leading Tallahassee's historically black university. Daytona State College is the latest Florida school to receive a Purple Star designation for its commitment to veterans. Danielle Pryor reports.
Purple Star campuses must provide a military liaison, priority enrollment for vets, a student-led transition program, and professional development for staff aimed at working with military students and their families. The Florida Department of Education administers the designation. Daytona State College serves more than 1,000 veterans and their family members who take classes at 7 campuses. The community college joins only 2 other Central Florida schools with the designation: the University of Central Florida and Seminole State College. In Orlando, I'm Danielle Pryor.
It is 81 degrees already here in Jacksonville. We're headed to the mid-90s again this afternoon with a 60% chance of showers, possibly a thunderstorm after 4 o'clock, down to the mid-70s overnight. And we have rain predicted for the weekend.
Support for NPR comes from Amazon Business. From small business to big enterprise and everything in between, Amazon Business works to help simplify the supplies buying process. Learn more about smart business buying at amazonbusiness.com. This is NPR.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Opinions expressed on the First Coast Connect Week in Review are those of our panelists and do not reflect the views of WJCT News 89.9.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and it's Friday, which means it's time for our First Coast Week in Review. Among our topics, a city effort to create affordable housing is a spectacular fail. Continued fallout from the JEA scandal turns investors against FPL. A local investigation examines a dramatic spike in DUI arrests in St. Johns County, and the man who murdered a Nassau County deputy is officially sentenced to death. To talk about all that and more, I am joined by Nate Monroe, Metro columnist at the Florida Times-Union. Good morning, Nate.
Good morning, Ann.
Emily Turner, Action News investigative reporter and anchor. Hi, Emily.
Hey, good morning, guys.
Aaron Farrar, reporter and weekend anchor at News4JAX, first time joining us. Hey, Aaron.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you here. And joining us via video is Tiffany Salome, consumer investigative reporter at News4JAX. Good morning, Tiffany.
Hey, guys. Good morning.
So let's get started, if we can, with a report from the city's Office of Inspector General. This was an affordable housing program. Emily, it was an effort to create more affordable housing. It was part of a 2019 state law that required cities to donate or sell their surplus properties. What went so wrong here?
Oh, boy, just about everything that could go wrong went wrong. The intentions were good. It was to take surplus property that the city got from unpaid taxes or liens or whatever, and then give them to people with the intention of creating affordable housing. The problem is this report found that didn't happen, and not just occasionally didn't happen, 95% of the time it didn't happen. And you go through and you look at the list, and there's certain groups of people who got chunks of properties because they found a loophole in the limit of the properties. And if you follow the deeds, they ultimately end up deeding them back to other people, making money, selling them. I mean, the most egregious case I found is in Springfield, and it was a property this church group got for free that ultimately they turned around and sold it for like hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, that's, and not within an affordable threshold.
And this is obviously an effort to create, it sounds like you say, like a good idea. The problem here was just no enforcement, no follow-up?
Well, the community development and housing director for Jacksonville, Florida, spoke at the budget committee meeting on Tuesday after our story first aired last week. The head of the finance committee, Ron Salem, called them to the floor and said, we want you to answer questions about how this failed. And the administration basically said the original legislation for the city was not tight enough. There wasn't a loophole. The deed restrictions didn't have any teeth. It says, oh, you must do this or provide affordable housing or it reverts back to the city. But it doesn't actually have the mechanisms in place to do that. And so the city will end up spending sometimes twice, if not more, than the property is worth to legally claw it back, which, you have to do. Otherwise, you're going to let these bad actors go. But the other option that they've also offered up is that the folks who haven't built affordable housing is that they could buy those properties for the assessed value, which is kind of an interesting twist there, I think.
Tiffany, this is something you have also been reporting on. As Emily said, 95% of these, properties didn't achieve what they intended to do. But this wasn't just a failure to, achieve affordable housing. It was actually, cost the city real money in terms of lost revenue and avoidable costs. For instance, if these properties themselves developed liens or were in arrears when it came to taxes, and then also homes that were sold. An estimate, I guess the Office of Inspector General found this is over $600,000.
Yeah, it's a lot of money and lost revenue, that the city could have gotten. And what's interesting is that, many of the people who got property in 2019 ended up selling that property. And in some cases to the same investors or the same people. It is actually wild when you start to look at who got property and what they did with it. It seems like nobody really followed up with what they were actually doing until late last year when the Inspector General report went live, right? And now here we are in July getting those questions answered by city leaders. They also gave away land in 2020 and 2023, but I do think there was a gap in 2021 and 22.
Explain that. What kind of gap?
They did not give away any land in 21 or 22. They didn't necessarily explain why, but they gave away another about 60 properties in 2020 and another 40 properties just recently in 23. So after the 2019 free land donation, they said, okay, we're not going to give land to a individual anymore. We're only going to give them to nonprofits, and thought, hey, maybe this would solve the problem. But it doesn't look like that was the case. You still have people who are getting land and not doing the right things with it. The 2023 list of donors we found had a woman we'd done an investigation on previously. Her name was Janae White, and she is actively under investigation by the state attorney and actively being sued for real estate and investment fraud. So you think to yourself, how could she be approved as a grantee? So we asked the city that question, and, really what they had to say is they had no reason to deny her application. She applied in August of 2023 to receive this free land, and they said everything looked good. She ran a nonprofit, and our investigation hadn't gone live until a few months later. That was in November. But if the city was really, looking into who was getting this land, they would see with a quick record search that she was already being sued in July from her investors. So it really just begs a lot of question.
Nate, how is it that there is so little oversight for a program like this?
Some of it is, I think, a pretty simple resource problem. It's one thing to take, one organization that's getting property and to sort of like background them, and it's not like on a case by case basis. That's not necessarily overly difficult, but doing that on a larger scale while you're handling all the other things that are on your plate. I'm very skeptical that a program like this is ever going to work particularly well. This philosophy that just get this property into the hands of the private sector or nonprofits and they'll just kind of take care of it. I mean, that's I just think that's a recipe for failure.
Well, and it's not just one. It's a common trend because at the same Finance Committee meeting on Tuesday where they brought up this lack of oversight, they also brought up another Inspector General's report about a lack of oversight for grants. And so it's a consistent trend that we're seeing. And to be clear, this program was under the prior administration and the grant issues that they were looking at were under the prior administration. But the problem has continued, at least with the grants at this point. And they're creating to put stopgaps in place. But what we've seen in many ways is the city giving away money or the city giving away property under various different programs or grants and then not following up to make sure that the people who've received it are being held accountable, and people are taking advantage of it, significantly so.
Aaron, I think what is so shocking to people looking at this from the outside is when the city acknowledged to that Finance Committee meeting that there was no element in the contract that basically, bound them to this or prevented them from selling the land, and that wasn't just a foundational element of the deal.
It was interesting, the fact that this was something that they said was going to be in place. And of course, you said, like you mentioned, the word stopgaps, that there would be these things in place to try to make sure that this was going the way that they intended it to go. But of course, it ended up being that was not the case. I think what's also interesting is maybe there might be those who did apply and had the intent to do things the right way, and they were denied, or they were not granted approval for land, and now they look at it like, okay, I had the intent of doing what was right with this, and I was rejected. I didn't have an opportunity to do this. So now it goes back to, if this is going to be cleaned up, what is that going to look like, and will that same trust be there, or is it permanently tarnished?
There have been a few, as Emily said, Nate, Inspector General reports that have been critical of various branches of city government or, departments that haven't been perhaps doing all they needed to do to maintain oversight. And, one that comes to mind certainly is the review that they did of the Clara White mission, which was, I think, really surprising because they were looking for, these quarterly reports that the city was required to obtain and, to track these grants that they were giving. And they were finding just empty Excel spreadsheets. So they would open up a folder, labeled for this month's quarterly report, and it was just blank. Does that strike you as an anomaly in city government, or is that more just we hear about it now because it's being reviewed?
I mean, I guess to be fair to the city, any city that has an office of Inspector General that is doing its job is going to find problems. I mean, there is no bureaucracy in the world that doesn't have, the empty desk drawer where a compliance report should be. I mean, that's why you have things like an OIG in place. But that also kind of illustrates the point that, contract oversight is expensive. It requires an upfront investment. It requires staff. And you're making that investment up front because in the long term, presumably, you do save money. I mean, that's like the purpose of contract oversight. And so, I think the city, and again, this is not specific to Jacksonville, but, you can get kind of blinders on about where do we put our money, how do we invest in things like hiring more staff in a compliance office. That doesn't rise on anyone's list, but this is why you do that.
And it is at the root, Emily, of issues that are very important, for instance, to this administration, like affordable housing. I mean, clearly that lost opportunity matters in addition to the money and the lack of oversight, because you think of what could have happened to all of these. How many properties was it?
174, I think. 170.
Yeah. So, I mean, great potential there.
Oh, and it's all missed opportunities in that in those situations, because not only are you losing revenue from taxes, are you accruing liens, you're also losing a home that a family could be in affordably. And then in some instances, they made changes that were things like they're vetting the people more, their deeds have more teeth, the They limit it now to 3 instead of 5 per person. But some of that then has backlash because it's like no good deed goes unpunished. So now there's people who are like Habitat for Humanity, who has the ability to build more homes. In fact, they got their 3 plots and they were built within 8 months. Well, the timeline is 2 years and you can extend, but they can't get more than that because they are limited. And they went back and asked and they can't get more. And so, you know, you're in this in between. And while the city wants to go back and recapture some of these properties, like the one where this one group has numerous properties, one of the options that they're given by the city is that they can buy those properties at the assessed value. But that doesn't mean they're going to become affordable. It's clear looking at it, if you follow the trail, that the intent was not to create affordable housing because it hasn't been done since 2019. It has been to accrue properties. And then even if they buy them at, you know, the assessed value, there's nothing, because a lot of these are out east, right, which is being gobbled up by real estate investors. There's nothing to stop these people once they buy them at the assessed value now to turn around and sell it at a massive profit down the road when things around the stadium are built up.
Tiffany, this is an important story. It appears to have generated some attention by the city. They're looking to remedy it. But what about the problem that you were referencing earlier with somebody like Janae White, who is kind of this acclaimed self-made millionaire entrepreneur? What happens to the properties that she recently acquired?
And we don't really have an answer for that, right? She got her land just recently in 2023. She was not one of the original donors in 2019. And we had asked the city, what kind of process did she go through? Did you go through a background check for everyone who applied? And essentially what they said is, no, we did not background check, each individual. They applied through their LLC. In this case, it was J. White Community Development Corporation, and they saw no red flags, but they didn't really dig deep enough to see the red flags, right? And this is after the city says that they implemented a more stringent vetting process. They said, we're going to require applicants to go through this whole big process, and the process is working, and the process is going to, limit the amount of properties people can get. And it's also going to, prevent this from happening in the future. And what do we know? An investor has 2 properties now, and she does not really have a great track record. Not only that, we were looking at the state records and we see that, her registered title vice president on this nonprofit is a well-known drug pin from the 1980s. I mean, how do we overlook that? Now, to be fair to the city, they did say that Henry Manns was not listed as her title VP back when she applied in 2023, and he was only recently given that position this year. But I mean, we could have prevented these people from getting the property in the first place if only we had the compliance standards that this kind of program requires.
I want to wrap, Nate, but is there any political element to this? We have a new administration coming in. We've had this series of Office of Inspector General reports, but I would guess most of those began under a prior administration. So is the timing just coincidental?
I think so. And I mean, at least my read on this, on the spectrum of like bad faith to good faith politics in City Hall, I mean, I get the sense that the city council discussions recognize that this isn't like nobody's out there saying the Deegan administration dropped the ball. I think there's this, I mean, this stuff is not like on her administration.
I almost meant the reverse, like whether her administration would be perhaps, benefiting politically from these failures under the prior administration.
Oh, I mean, I'm skeptical of that too. I mean, we have a mayor now, and it's Donna Deegan, and the buck stops with her, and it's on her to fix it. It is clear that to the extent that she's, the time she's been in office, these problems have persisted. So, I mean, I think I'm not a big fan of giving politicians gold stars for doing their jobs, and the Deegan administration's job is to make sure this program's working the way it's supposed to.
There are 2, just really quickly,
Yeah.
there were 2 Republican city council members on Tuesday who made it clear and this is what they were saying, that kind of wraps up that point. A couple of the promises when she came into office: affordable housing and to clean up the mess and the corruption. And she's now been in office for a year. And yes, there are efforts being done to correct this, but it's still in play. That is going to be something that you will hear the other side bring up during the next election cycle, I believe.
I want to move on now, Nate. This is a story that you've been covering, boy, longer than you've been a father.
Yes.
And I'm sure it feels like a child of its own. But there's a new lawsuit that was filed alleging wrongdoing against Florida's largest utility, NextEra. They own FP&L. It was filed by investors on July 2nd. So this lawsuit is really based in part on your reporting. Catch us up, and if you can, connect some of the dots.
Oh, that's a that's a big task. So this lawsuit was actually filed by one investor. This guy, Jeff Kuzmierski, I'm probably butchering his last name, lives in Lee County, has some NextEra stock, and became unhappy with the way the company was being run. After reading a lot of stories in the Times-Union, the Orlando Sentinel, the Miami Herald, and Floodlight about controversies around the state connected to a former political consulting firm of NextEra called Matrix. We, of course, did a big show on Matrix here a couple of months ago. These controversies involved manipulating elections, manipulating public policy, harassing journalists. There is a separate controversy in Maine that this litigation discusses. And this investor's overall point is that the company's board of directors failed to put safeguards in place to stop this kind of these sort of dirty tricks from taking place under NextEra's oversight. Now, this lawsuit in and of itself is not necessarily remarkable. There are several civil proceedings in motion right now against NextEra that stem, at least in part, from those controversies. What is different about this is this investor has confidential NextEra records that he was able to obtain because he is a shareholder. It looks like, based on the court filings and some corporate disclosure forms that NextEra has filled out, that this shareholder and his attorneys negotiated a way of getting some what looked to be pretty interesting records, corporate records from NextEra. They have those records that they're governed by a non-disclosure agreement, so there are big parts of this lawsuit that are redacted. But at some point, presumably, we'll learn a little bit more about what might be in those documents.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about the week's big headlines with our reporters, Emily Turner, Tiffany Salome, Aaron Farrar, and Nate Monroe. And you can join our conversation by calling 904-549-2937. You can also email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Nate, just to kind of flesh that out a little bit, the lawsuit is alleging that there was a loss, like a precipitous loss in stock value following the reports on all of this. Billions of dollars of value lost because of the attached scandal, essentially. Is that right?
That's right.
And what is the connection to JEA? Because all of this kind of comes back to that local scandal with our own city-owned utility.
Sure. And also just to clarify something here for listeners too, the other way that this lawsuit is a little bit different, this is something called a derivative lawsuit. So this shareholder is not seeking a big payday. He's not seeking payouts for shareholders for their lost value. This is a lawsuit that's these are a little bit weird, but it's like he's kind of stepping in the shoes of NextEra and suing in some ways the executives and former executives of NextEra that should have helped stop some of this stuff. Huh. So like for example, one of the kind of remedies he's asking for is to claw back some compensation from some retired NextEra executives who were in place during all of this. So JEA is, a kind of prong of controversy that this lawsuit is centered on. This political consulting firm that worked for NextEra, Matrix, it deployed dirty tricks there was an offer, there was a solicitation to a former member of the Jacksonville City Council to take what, by all accounts, looks like basically a fake kind of no-show job. The idea was to get him off the city council. He was a vocal opponent of selling JEA to NextEra. There was an effort. There was an effort to surveil me. I was also very critical of the process to sell JEA, and those are among other controversies that are part of this lawsuit.
Yeah, I mean, that surveillance of you included monitoring your activities with your then girlfriend, taking pictures of you, walking your dog.
Right. Having a private investigator pulled a pretty detailed, report from a consumer credit agency type place. Yeah. And those were just, not footnotes, but not by any means like the full extent of the controversy here. I mean, again, there was a ghost candidate scandal that's probably a little bit too much to get into on the show today, that we've talked about before. There was these Matrix operatives secretly took over a Florida online news site and were basically just pumping out Florida Power and Light propaganda, and also harassing a Miami Herald journalist through that publication. So I mean, there was a lot of wrongdoing.
As you said, we did do a really deep dive on this program. If people are interested in finding that, it aired on May 7th of this year, and it was Nate and also his colleagues at Floodlight and the Orlando Sentinel who've done this deep reporting. We have a call from JD in Sea Island, Georgia. Good morning, JD.
Good morning. My one question is, back in 2018, when FP&L was trying to steal JEA out from under the constituents of Duval County, what part did Matrix have to do with that one? And the reason why I know that they did have a big part of it is I'm a retired renewable energy executive. I've been watching the Public Service Commission, and I've been watching the utility monopolies all my life. So what exact part do you think Matrix had to play in that little boondoggle?
Thanks, JD. I mean, I think you were kind of alluding to that in terms of the surveillance, certainly, the job offer that was made to former city council member Garrett Dennis.
Yeah, I mean, Matrix had been a consultant for NextEra for many years, for like a decade, and there is some controversy even about how to refer to Matrix. The owner of Matrix alleges that a lot of this work that was the subject of reporting was being done without his knowledge by some former employees of his. But the point being, Matrix was a consultant for NextEra for many years, and they were apparently on the ground doing work for NextEra's benefit in some capacity or another without broad knowledge about it. It's not like any of us were aware of Matrix doing things locally in support of NextEra's bid to buy JEA. And we didn't know any of that until we got, leaked records. So,
yeah, and we should make clear, if we haven't already, I mean, FP&L, NextEra was trying actively to buy JEA and was sort of assumed to be the likeliest winner of that attempt.
Yes.
Had it happened.
Yes. And I mean, I think it's fair to say now, neither the company nor Matrix nor anyone who used to work for Matrix has ever been accused of wrongdoing by any legal authorities. But I think it is fair to say that Florida Power and Light very much loomed over the JEA sales process. I mean, cast a long shadow over that for sure.
If you're just joining us, we're talking about the week's biggest headlines with our panel of journalists. If you want to call or comment, you can reach out at 904-549-2937 or email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. I want to move on now, Emily, to a story that you did this week about a spike in DUI arrests in St. Johns County. You reported this week that the number of first-time DUI arrests in that county has tripled in the last 3 years. But that's not the whole story.
No, I think perhaps maybe the more alarming statistic is, of those first-time DUI arrests, how many of them have simply been thrown out, not pled down to a lesser charge, not pretrial deferment, which is an agreement where it's your first time and, you do these things, but you're not going to get the felony. Not any of it. Just full on. The state attorney's office says we don't have enough to prosecute, and they either don't even bother. They don't even pull. There's like not enough information, or it goes null pros, and those are thrown out. But it's not done until after the person's been arrested, and they've been paid. They've had to, bond themselves out, paid for an attorney. It's gone on their record, all of those things, and so the two big statistics here are the spike that we've seen in the last really 3 years, to the point that first-time DUI arrests in St. Johns County are more than any of its other surrounding counties by a significant margin, including Volusia County, the home of Daytona Beach and Bike Week and Spring Break and all of that. But the more staggering one is the number of cases that have been thrown out in St. Johns County is more than double all of those counties combined.
In that judicial circuit, right? And so you say Volusia County, they have twice the population of St. Johns County, and you reported they have half the DUI arrests, which, given its reputation for Daytona and all of the events there, does seem really remarkable.
Right, and when Sheriff Hardwick took office, the sheriff's office told me this was a big priority of his. He created a DUI task force, if you will, and they've really made this a focus. And to be clear, getting drunk drivers off the road is important. No one's saying this is great, go, drink under the influence. Absolutely not. But the concern is, are all of those arrests being made correctly? Because a wrongful arrest, or an arrest where someone is maybe not impaired, is damaging. I mean, it could ruin someone's life.
And the cases that you dug into on a specific basis, it wasn't, as you say, something where there was a deal made, or, hey, this is the first time, we're just going to kind of cut the penalty and make this case go away. There were actually cases where someone blew a 0.000.
Right. And since I've done this story, actually, I've heard from even more people. I've heard from, so the case specifically I talked to is the attorney of a young man who blew 000s, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Urine tests came back clean. And ultimately, the state attorney did not even bother. They just threw the case out. And there is another case where there was a young man, a teenager, on his way home from baseball practice, blew 000s, was taken to the hospital because he was a juvenile. I mean, and there was a woman who was arrested and wasn't even in her car at the time of the arrest. And as the story has come out and attorneys are coming forward, it's concerning because it's like, why, if the tests are saying you're clear, why are you pursuing an arrest? And I got information back from the St. Johns County's office, a sheriff's office, which is mostly data, and talking about how the most important thing and their only impetus is to get drunk drivers off the street, but not a real clear answer on specific to these cases. They more say, oh, this has to do with the state attorney's office, but the state attorney's office clearly doesn't think they have enough to prosecute the case, or they would have thrown it out. And the statute for drunk driving, for people who don't know, is thicker than the statute for homicide. And the attorneys that have told me, our law and safety expert, for a DUI case to simply be thrown out as opposed to pled down to a lesser charge like reckless driving or whatever is exceptionally rare. And so it brings into question the validity of those arrests. And also for perspective, it is still a small percentage of the overall arrests, but it's enough that, especially for the people who have been caught in this, significant and concerning.
Yeah, Erin, I want to ask you about that because Emily's report, she says that, it represents only about 1.5% of first-time DUI arrests that fall into that category. But, once you're arrested and booked and have a mugshot and you're in the courts for a DUI, that can have really long-range impact.
It's public information, so it's out there. People will know, and then it damages sometimes people's reputation. And I know we talked about careers. It damages their opportunity or possibility of getting a job that they either want or just might be desperately needing at that time. And it's a longer process of trying to rectify the situation where that is not a concern for them anymore, because now they're concerned of like, oh, is this going to follow me and for how long? Will I continue to get questions about what happened? Will I continue to get questions on or curiosities of, oh, do we have to be worried about this happening again? And then when these particular situations that you mentioned, where even when someone wasn't even in the car, what was their line of thought or thinking when they knew that they were going to try to fight the charges, and what were they told in that immediate moment? What is their struggle now? Is it a situation where they are back to normal, where they don't have to worry about it? And if so, how long was that process to get there? So I know each person's story is different and each person's circumstance is different, but the common factor, common denominator in all of it is that each person is going to have to deal with this in some capacity. And will it be a situation where they can never shake this, or they can never move on with their lives because this is always kind of in the rear view, but still visible because of the circumstance?
And Tiffany, I think people are accustomed when it comes to the legal system of expecting some kind of, defense machination that allows somebody to get away with something. And it would be hard, to Aaron's point, if a future employer was looking at this, if you want to be, say, a commercial truck driver or a school bus driver, to try to explain the legal nuance that Emily's reported on in terms of this wasn't, a plea deal. This wasn't something where I just got away with it because I had a really great DUI lawyer. This was a case that there was really absolutely no evidence.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, that could affect you in so many different ways. Even if you want to be a news photographer, you probably can't have a DUI on your record. So, I mean, it's interesting, Emily's reporting, and the fact that they are just simply dropping the cases. I think there's way more to the story here about what's really going on.
And Nate, I mean, I don't know personally if there's any funding that attaches to, DUI arrests at a federal or state level, but I mean, is there a reason, any motivation that would, justify an agency boosting its DUI arrests to that degree and then also dropping as many cases?
I mean, it's certainly plausible, even if the motivation is just political, wanting to be seen as cracking down on something that's popular to crack down on. I mean, the facts in some of the stories that Emily reported are simply outrageous. And if the sheriff takes this issue seriously, takes DUIs as seriously as he claims, he will be doing everything he can to make sure that these kinds of frivolous arrests are not happening. I mean, blowing a 0.00 is, but arresting them for drunk driving nonetheless is simply inexplicable. I mean, this isn't some legal technicality. This is like common sense on the spot. That stuff shouldn't be happening, and it's really disturbing. Having a case thrown out is great, but as everyone has made the point, that really understates the disruption to somebody's life that an arrest can have. And so, I mean, people who care about DUIs should not want this happening because it discredits all those arrests.
Emily, is there any suggestion that the sheriff is going to look at these cases, or there's an opportunity to perhaps expunge these arrests from someone's record?
So I've reached out multiple times for a statement regarding specifically the cases. I've not gotten a statement specific to the questionability of those cases yet. One of the questions you asked earlier is why, and that's the big question mark. So I looked into it. There is funding that is attached to DUI arrests at the state and federal level, but I asked the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office if he received any, and they said no. And the only other thing I can find that could potentially be a motivating factor here is Mothers Against Drunk Driving has a big award ceremony and issues awards for the number of arrests that are made, like people who make it clear your job is to get DUI, drunk drivers off the street. It's based on the number of arrests, not based on the number of arrests that stick or convictions, which is an interesting distinction to be made there. And multiple deputies from the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office have been awarded some form of an award from MAD, and they've been very, proud of that on social media and on Instagram, and that kind of thing. So to me, anyway, maybe it's just a bragging rights thing. Like, look at us. This is our, we're getting drunk drivers off the street. We're, keeping our roads safer, that kind of thing. But again, it comes with some pretty serious concerns.
Well, we've got a question from Tom on Facebook. He says, what percentage of these arrests were residents of Duval County? St. John's has a history of targeting Duval drivers. I'm not sure that that's accurate, but do we know where the county of origin was for these drivers, or is it just the arrests? We know the location.
I don't know the county of origin for the driver. I do know the arresting agency because, of course, in St. Johns County, you have St. Augustine Beach, City of St. Augustine, Florida Highway Patrol can make arrests, but the overwhelming arresting agency is the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office. So I don't know where they originated from. I just know who booked them.
All right. I want to move on now briefly to talk about an important story out of Nassau County. Aaron, the judge in handing down a death sentence this week for a man who pleaded guilty to the 2021 murder of a deputy there, Joshua Moyers. You were in the courtroom. What was the mood and what was the sensibility? Was it just kind of a fait accompli? We knew that the jury obviously had already sentenced him to death.
So I was not in the courtroom for this procedure. Just over the last couple of years, though, I have been to a couple of different hearings. But just from our coverage from just a couple of colleagues, they were saying that I don't think that it was really a surprise of the results of this. I think, of course, going back to the emotion in the courtroom, just from what we were able to see, was the fact that it was difficult for family members to be there, and understandably so. It was difficult for them to be in that situation, and just even though this seemed like justice to a certain extent, they're not going to get their loved one back. I do know that Patrick McDowell was just kind of looking at the judge within the 10 or 15 minutes that this hearing happened. There were a couple of things, though, throughout the last couple of years that really stood out in this kind of situation that made it, I wouldn't say unusual, but different from a couple of other cases like this. Was the fact that Patrick McDowell did take the stand and even just outright said, yeah, I take responsibility for what I did, and I don't deserve to live. That was kind of one of those moments where it was like, okay, this is probably going to be the result. Also, the discussions about PTSD from his time in the military, that was a big conversation throughout the course of the sentencing trial. That was a lot of different people who gave testimony talked about the severity of that and the seriousness of that and the repercussions that can happen from that. The other thing, though, that we have to remember was the idea of what were the parameters going to be for the jury in that situation. We knew that because of the new state law, now the jury only had to have at least an 8-4 decision, or a majority of that. It didn't have to be unanimous. So then a portion of this time frame was wondering, okay, what are they going to have to deal with? Will they have to be a unanimous decision, or will it be what the new state law mandate is? So all of that combined into that one moment, it was like, yes, you had an idea that the death sentence was going to be what was given, but there were so many other factors where it was just like, okay, there is that slight feeling where it's like, maybe we really don't know what's going to happen, or like, would his sentence be commuted to life in prison without parole? But I remember covering this the day that Joshua Moyers was shot. I remember the manhunt. It was a very extensive situation, a lot of pressure to find Patrick McDowell at the time. And then a couple of days later, when Joshua Moyers ended up dying, it was just a culmination of a lot in a situation. As now it's still not over, because we know it's going to be years and years of appeals, and that we know what this process is. But it was just something that wasn't just cut and dry. It was a lot of different factors that you don't typically see in a kind of crime trial for sentencing that you would see in other kind of circumstances.
And Nate, as Aaron alluded to, the law changed in the middle of this case. And so his attorneys, Patrick McDowell's attorneys, had argued he should be sentenced under the unanimity requirement because the murder occurred when that was still in effect. And he was convicted 11-1. So he, if he had been sentenced under that prior rule, would not have gotten the death penalty. So it is a changing landscape always, it seems, in death penalty cases. Very complicated.
It is. Particularly, I mean, it seems like the kind of edge cases really are what influence death penalty policy a lot. I don't know that this one really qualifies as an edge case, but yeah, I mean it is it has been a very dynamic issue in Florida the last several years now, and yeah, we live in a landscape where non-unanimous juries can issue death sentences. I personally don't love that, but again, this is not one of those cases that I think generates a lot of opposition necessarily.
And just very briefly, Emily, not likely that a judge would go against a jury's recommendation of death.
No, and it's I think more than anything, the fact that he sat on the stand and said, I don't deserve to live. Like, what are you supposed to do? You're going to overturn a jury and go against the man himself saying, I deserve to die? I mean, regardless of how you feel, that it's a pretty strong statement.
Nate Monroe, Aaron Farrar, Emily Turner, and Tiffany Salome, thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you.
And wrongful death law firm. Serious injury cases are complex, and civil trial attorneys present the evidence juries need to see and hear. More at waynehogan.law.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
On the next Science Friday, why a black shark scientist decided to forge her own path outside of academia.
Maybe there's just another way to do science. Let me try that.
We'll talk with Jasmine Graham about her trailblazing career and her mission to train other young scientists of color. That's on Science Friday from WNYC Studios.
Today at 2 on WJCT News 89.9.
On the next Florida Roundup, homelessness. It's a challenge that often is out of sight for many Floridians. But look closer and you may see the tents under bridges or encampments just beyond the bushes. A Supreme Court ruling and a new state law reshape how communities can deal with homelessness. What are the signs of homelessness in your community? Email us now, radio@thefloridaroundup.org. This is Tom Hudson. Be sure to join us Friday, noon until 1.
Joe Biden is losing support as more of his party voice concerns about his decision to stay in the race.
I think I've demonstrated that I know how to get things done, but there's more to do.
Also on the roundup, the Secret Service is under pressure after the attempt to assassinate former President Trump, and what this week's RNC tells us about the mood among Republicans. That's all next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. For local runners, the annual Thanksgiving morning 5K is almost as traditional as that day's menu. It's true of the 10th annual UF Health Turkey Trot and why early registration is key to participating. I'm joined now by the event organizer and UF Health Jacksonville events director, Megan Ortega-Methven. Welcome, Megan.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. So it's only mid-July. It's a little hot to be thinking about Thanksgiving. Why is runner registration open now?
So our race hosts thousands of participants every year, and every year it grows by the thousands. Last year we ended up closing the Monday before the Turkey Trot, and this year we expect to have about 5,000 participants, and once that closes out, we're going to close it and you can't register. So participation and registration is open now, just so that we can make sure that everyone can sign up a lot earlier.
And it looked like, so you're stopping the 5K enrollment at 5K, right? It's like a 5,000 person maximum.
Yes.
And that's a big bunch of people.
Yes.
But this is a race. I mean, it's a serious race for people who are runners, but it's also really kind of a different spirit. Tell us a little bit about what it's like there in Atlantic Beach, what it is in the community, how that all kind of fits in on Thanksgiving Day.
Sure. It is a Thanksgiving tradition. Everyone comes out, even if they're not participating in the race, because there's Pete's right to the back of our race.
Pete's Bar.
Yes, and they have the big Thanksgiving tradition as well. So
Sure.
people come out from everywhere, whether they're from Atlantic Beach. I know I live in the Mandarin area. A ton of people come out from everywhere in Jacksonville to come to our race, start off the morning, go to Pete's, and then they do their Thanksgiving thing. So it's really a tradition.
And so it's named, it was formerly called Tony's Turkey Trot.
Yes.
Who's Tony? Remind us who he was.
So so I can give you a little bit of the history of the Turkey Trot. So the Tony's Turkey Trot was started by Anne Marie Tucker, who had a nonprofit called the Tony Midori Fund. It was her father who had a TBI and started this race because of him.
And remind us what a TBI is.
It is a traumatic brain injury.
Okay. And that's ultimately people who have a TBI benefit from this, this fundraiser.
So programs at UF Health Jacksonville that revolve around brain injuries and traumatic brain injuries will benefit from this.
And so it was named after Tony, but then UF Health took over the race?
Yes. In 2019, we partnered with the Tony Midori Fund, and then eventually we bought the race, and it is now the UF Health Jacksonville Tony's Turkey Trot.
And how many years now has it been?
This is the 10th year.
Okay.
Yes, it's a big year for us.
So tell us some of the programs that this will support, because they're really very unique benefits for people who are going through treatment for a brain injury.
Sure. So over the years, we have not just programs, but we have purchased pieces of equipment. One thing that was really exciting that we purchased about a year and a half ago was the transcranial Doppler. It is a piece of equipment that you can use on your brain, and it measures the blood flow that's going on in there. So it's super important to catch a brain bleed because seconds matter. We also have supported numerous patients that have gone through our Haley Brain Wellness Program. The official name is the Leon L. Haley, MD, Jr. Haley Brain Wellness Program. It is for first responders and veterans that have gotten a traumatic brain injury, and it's very holistic. There are different programs within that program. So speech therapy, art therapy, equine therapy, physical therapy. So that's one of the programs. And then we also partner with the Brooks Rehabilitation for their Brooks Brain Injury Clubhouse. And so when you suffer from a brain injury, sometimes you're not able to go back into the community. So with loved ones, and if they're not able to be with them 24/7, this is a place and a clubhouse for people with TBIs to come and have a community as well.
So I have a couple people in my life right now with concussions. How is that different from a traumatic brain injury, or is it?
It is a little bit different, but it is a brain injury, and it's something that you should definitely get checked out.
But I mean, a traumatic brain injury is a kind of a more severe...
A little bit more severe, yes.
Yeah.
So it could be a true brain bleed that is going on and could eventually cause...
Is that the definition of a brain bleed? Is that kind of what makes it different from a concussion?
I'm not sure.
All right, we're going to ask a doctor about that later.
Yes, and I think we will eventually will have a physician come on and talk about that.
So Megan, if people want to sign up, where can they do that, and when do you think they should do it by?
Sure. They should sign up as soon as they can. You can go to ufhealthjax.org/turkey trot. So we have an early bird registration fee right now. It's $40 for the 5K, and that will increase starting October 1st. And then once it gets into November, it will increase again. So the highest price it will be is about $50.
The sooner the better?
Yes, the sooner the better. And with the capping out at 5,000, it's better to sign up a lot earlier.
Well, Megan Ortega-Methvin, thank you so much for joining us today and telling us about it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us.
And that's our program. We encourage your feedback. You can send suggestions to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. And if you missed anything, you can catch our rebroadcast, or you can subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss another broadcast on your favorite podcast platform. Don't forget to listen Saturday when neurologist Dr. Joe Servin explores the healing power of sound. And then join us again Monday when we look at Florida's Amendment 4 on abortion and how a new financial impact statement could have broad political implications. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com.
After surviving an attempted assassination, Donald Trump promised he would rewrite what was originally supposed to be, quote, a humdinger of a speech at the Republican National Convention. He said he'd seek unity. We'll take a look at what Trump said and whether or not that message was embraced by delegates, Republican Party leaders, and Trump's base nationwide. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.